And joining me now with more from D.C. is Washington Post congressional reporter Sean Sullivan. Sean, great to have you with us. Thanks for being here. Now, President Trump is confident he will prevail in lawsuits against his national emergency declaration. But when you look at the issue politically, could the president alienate voters in red border states like Texas and Arizona with his wall push?
He certainly could alienate some of these voters, and he might even alienate some local and potentially even federal Republican lawmakers in the process. When I talked to Republican senators on Capitol Hill a few weeks ago, before the president declared a national emergency, they brought up the idea of lawsuits, and they said that this was one of the reasons why they worried about President Trump acting on his own. And so now we're starting to see these things actually happen. This was something that Republicans anticipated. And keep a close eye on Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He's up for re-election this year. But what will he do? Will he side with the president on this? Will he side with landowners in his own state? Kind of puts him in a tough political spot as well. And he was one of the most outspoken Republican senators that I talked to a few weeks ago, expressing concerns about the president taking action on his own. So this could be a very tricky political situation for the president and really Republicans, running for office in 2020.
And Sean, President Trump claims the states suing him are led, quote, mostly by open border Democrats and the radical left. At the same time, he has sought to portray Democrats as a whole, especially the ones who might be running for president against him, as radical socialists. Now, you have an article out about this in the Post. What can you tell us about his new strategy here?
Well, Tanya, what it looks like is happening right now is that President Trump and his allies on Capitol Hill and elsewhere in the Republican Party are trying to lay the groundwork for their argument in 2020, in the 2020 elections. And what that argument appears to be right now is don't vote for Democrats. This is not a mainstream party right now. This is not a party that represents middle-of-the-road values. And just look at their primary, look at the issues they're talking about, look at how far they are racing to the left. This says a couple of things. One, it shows that Republicans recognize that President Trump is pretty unpopular right now. And if this race focuses on him and his record, that could be very, very problematic for the party in 2020. So they want to sort of divert attention to the Democratic Party. But of course, it also presents challenges for Democrats right now because you have so many candidates in this race. They're trying to stand out from each other. But not only that, they're trying to demonstrate to voters that they can run against President Trump. They're sort of auditioning to be the Democratic nominee, and they're trying to show voters that they're not just going to fall victim to Trump's attack. So when he portrays Democrats as far left candidates, as socialists, it'll be interesting, and indeed it already has become interesting to see how some of these candidates react.
Sure.
A lot of them are trying to sort of strike this balance between satisfying the liberal base but not appearing to be too far to the left that they fall victim to Trump's attacks.
They essentially have to decide where on the spectrum they want to land, because essentially you have candidates at the one end who are openly socialist, like Bernie Sanders, and candidates at the other end who are saying no to some of these democratic socialist policies, such as Amy Klobuchar, and then a whole bunch of people who perhaps are trying to walk the line in between. But at what point are they going to have to really say, here's where I fall on the spectrum?
Yeah, that's really going to be, I think, a big question in this race. I was in New Hampshire over the weekend, and I went to a campaign event that Senator Cory Booker was at, and he was asked a question by somebody in the crowd about Medicare for All, which, of course, is something that liberal activists have been championing more and more over the past couple of years. And what he said, I think, was sort of telling about the way this race has gone. He said, look, he talked about how he supported the proposal, but he also pointed out, hey, it might be hard to pass that given the support we would need in the Senate. And so therefore, the party should also be ready to pursue more incremental reforms. I saw something like this again at another campaign event the next day that Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, did in New Hampshire, where she was talking about the Green New Deal, a climate proposal that is favored on the left. She said she supported, but she also added that some of these things might not happen. Not everything in that proposal may actually be realized. So you're already seeing these candidates sort of try to strike a balance that could end up being a very, very difficult balance, because you're right, at some point they may ultimately have to choose which side they're going to be on as these contrasts between the candidates sort of sharpen naturally as we move toward Iowa, New Hampshire, and the first batch of early states next year.
But Democrats' appetite for a progressive candidate may be larger than anyone knows, because when you look at Bernie Sanders' staggering fundraising totals, I mean, nearly $6 million in 24 hours, what does that say about his popularity? I mean, he is a self-avowed socialist, and he's heading into 2020 with a lot of money. Does this give him and his platform a clear edge? I mean, he, at least for one out of the group, is pretty well defined.
Yeah, I think what it shows is that there is still a lot of support in the Democratic Party for Bernie Sanders right now. Of course, 2020 is very different than 2016. It was really sort of a binary choice back then between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Now you have a lot more choices, and a lot of these candidates have adopted platforms that are similar to Sanders, or at least more similar than Hillary Clinton's was. So I think a lot of Democrats had questions about how much appeal Bernie Sanders would have in today's party. But the initial indicators, at least, based on the fundraising, based on how much interest there has been online in his announcement, shows that there are a lot of people who are still pretty loyal to Bernie Sanders. And in a crowded field where everybody's sort of trying to introduce themselves, he's already done that. People already know who Bernie Sanders is. And so I think this shows that he really could emerge as a significant factor in this Democratic primary.
Interesting stuff. Washington Post congressional reporter Sean Sullivan, thank you.
Thanks, Tanya.